Hello everyone, welcome back to Replay, where games are art. I'm Jed, and we're continuing on with Final Fantasy VI. Hang on while I just check my equipment. Okay. So, this is an interesting little moment. Again, just loosely sketch the characters. Edgar wants to make sure his people know he's safe. They matter a great deal to him. And now we're in this huge, complicated cave system and utterly spoiled for choice. We can go anywhere in this room, and choosing the correct choice is starting to matter in random battles. For example, enemies no longer die from one use of attack. It takes my whole party a turn to kill one. But Edgar's auto crossbow is a tremendously powerful physical attack at this point in the game, often able to end a battle in one move. Look too at the tile sets in this... Hang on. Larg, hard to talk about the tile sets when I'm getting attacked. Alright, I'm gonna talk about the enemy design a bit in a later fight, but as soon as we get back, I'll talk about the tile sets. As I was saying, look at the tile set here. There's actually relatively few tiles in use, but they're individually complex and being combined in clever ways to create the illusion of very complicated walls. The downside is that many of the caverns in the game are going to look rather similar, making it easy to get lost. So let's talk about those enemy designs. I actually really like the design of the crawlies. They're basically cave centipedes, and that's a really good pick for the first real, non-tutorial dungeon in the game. The reason they're such a good choice is that centipedes are a traditional low-level monster in Dungeons & Dragons. They're something that you encounter in real life in caves, and honestly, cave centipedes look pretty monstrous. It's a good pick for a monster. As for the other one, the Bleary, I have no idea what it's supposed to be. Maybe a stalagmite, but hairy with an eye, so like a monster that pretends to be a stalagmite to attack you? I don't know. I really don't have much. That one's weird. Figaro Cave is still quite small, so we soon exit onto the world map and encounter... I'm pretty sure that's a Pokemon. Are bipedal rhinos a thing in Japan? I don't know. Regardless, there's this interesting little house standing here by itself, and it provokes a reaction from Edgar. No response for cabbage in the daikon? Okay, guess not. This is another clever bit of characterization. The unnamed him is, of course, Sabin, and this is continuing the game's approach of having most of Sabin's characterization sketched out before he joins the party. And I'll talk a little bit about what that characterization is later in this video. First, though, there's this old man who is suspiciously knowledgeable about the dwellers in this house. I have rather a suspicion that this is none other than Master Duncan, who's supposedly dead but turns up quite alive later in the game. He, of course, wants us to meet Sabin and help him defeat Vargas, as we'll be doing shortly. Anyway, I was going to talk about Sabin's characterization. What's most interesting to me here is that he has a favorite flower and a favorite tea. That doesn't really fit with the musclehead image he projects later on. It suggests someone with a degree of sensitivity and refinement. Which makes sense for, a classic fantasy prince who's run away to be a musclehead. And not too much later in the game, we'll see that he's definitely not the straightforward bruiser that he's suggested to be. So this brings us to South Figaro, which was mentioned before as where Figaro's goods are traded. This is the first real town we experience in the game. Narsh, we couldn't visit any of the shops, and Figaro Castle is, well, a castle, so you get a lot of identical guards who say the same things. This is a town, though, and by the standards of Final Fantasy up to this point, a huge one. The buildings are big and elaborate and multi-leveled, as you can see, and there are people everywhere. Mostly worried about the Empire now that sides have been taken by Figaro. Oh gods, the bane of every RPG player's existence. The unskippable tutorial. Blah. Note though that it is Mog giving this tutorial once again, and that's important. Last time I talked a little bit about how in some ways he's the symbol of choice as it manifests in this game, and his role here of introducing us to relics actually goes along with that very well. You see, the relics in this game are largely used to imitate abilities from earlier Final Fantasy games. For example, the True Knight relic gives you the cover ability, which used to belong to knights in FF3 and 5, and to Cecil in FF4. So what's going on here is that Mog is giving you the choice to customize your characters with abilities that would otherwise not be available to them as part of their preset class equivalent. However, of the ones available here at this stage in the game, the only one I really want is the sprint shoes. The others are just too expensive. As you can see, the sprint shoes are kind of a must-have. The only downside is it does take a little while to adjust to using them after having played the last hour and a half of the game without them. And here's Shadow. This is another character introduction, and a brilliant one. Shadow is introduced entirely by absence. All we get is his amazing, lonely music, his description that tells us next to nothing, and his refusal to talk, plus a little bit of Edgar's knowledge of him. But that's enough to tell us what we need to know. He's a dangerous, badass loner. Also, we get to name him, so we know he'll eventually be joining the party. Interesting that we didn't get that opportunity with Mog. Despite him being on the cover of the game, it's being quite coy about him joining us. A strange choice, to be sure. Shadow's theme is so good. Same people from whom I stole my intro theme did a version of Shadow's theme as well. It's really good. I'll link it in the description of the video. And there's also little hints for later in the game. We'll come back to this town and it'll be significantly different. That cider thing is a clue for a puzzle that's impossible to start until that later visit. This is actually true of this visit to South Figaro in general. It's is heavily foreshadowing later events, namely that the Empire will be attacking this town. But it doesn't seem to be particularly interested in having anything happen now. There's really nothing to do in this town except for go to the shops, but there's a lot of great flavor from talking to the people, so that's what I'm going around trying to get. As I said last video, I'm not going to talk to everybody in the game, but where there's some good flavor to be had, like here, I'm going to talk to as many people as I can. I'm not really sure why it was necessary to hide that elixir so thoroughly. That's a pretty weak reward for the amount of effort required to get it. Ah yes, and another bit of foreshadowing of things to come, the rich trader. This is an interesting point. It is specifically the wealthiest man in South Figaro who is a trader working for the Empire. On the surface, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Even if his wealth is a result of the Empire's payoffs, the wealthy are rarely benefited by massive changes in the status quo, because their wealth has value within the context of a specific social structure. But that's the key word, isn't it? Structure. Wealth has value in an orderly society, and the Empire is order run amok. Of course the wealthy are on their side, just as the wealthy are by and large usually on the side of fascist movements. They believe they are in control, and that the fascists can be used to maintain control in the face of rising socialist or anarchist movements. But in the end they discover they're riding the tiger, just as this particular rich man will. Okay, I just need to buy up some stuff, make sure my characters are thoroughly equipped, because as we've already had hinted in some conversations here, we need to head up into the mountains, and that's going to be a bit of an increase in the game's challenge. Okay, equipped up. Time to explore the town a bit more. Oh, and there's that merchant we saw with the cider earlier. Yeah, the old man is also part of that same puzzle we can't do yet. Okay, pretty sure I ranted about this last video, but seriously, there is no excuse for the inability to push people out of your way in this game. It was in FF4. They had it. Why did they lose it? It was great. You never had to wait for people. They would accelerate when you pushed on them. I mean, that's all you really have to do. Make it so that when you walk into a character and push the button, it accelerates them in their walking pattern. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, they elected not to do it with this game. Oh well. Okay, having sold a bunch of stuff, I now sort of have money again, and I'll gain more as I go through the next dungeon, so that by the time I find myself in a town where I can shop again, which is actually quite a bit of game away, I'll be in a much better situation money-wise and be able to buy up some more stuff, maybe even some of those relics. So yeah, this is good puzzle design. Townsfolk aren't just telling us things at random, but by stitching together comments that are relative to them. The hints of Sabin in Duncan's house, the guy outside, presumably in response to questions from the party that weren't shown, telling us that that is Duncan's house. Now Duncan's wife telling us where Duncan and his students went. All of that adds up to knowing where we're headed. we're going up into the mountains to find Savin. And that's actually something that's surprisingly difficult to do in an RPG. I mean, I've run tabletop games where the players miss every clue I try to lay in front of them, and that's with me as a sapient human being actively adapting to the choices they're making and the ideas they're expressing in an attempt to get them to go where I want them to go. It's much harder to do that with a video game where you have only a very small amount of dialogue per character, and you have no idea what the player is thinking because they're not playing it until long after you've made the game. So, pretty impressive work on the part of the game designers here to make it absolutely clear to us where we're going, what to expect there, and why. Chocobo Ride! Chocobos are such a strange choice. At this point, they're a mandatory element of the Final Fantasy series because they've been in it several times, but they're still so bizarre. Instead of horses, we ride ostrich things? I don't know, maybe it's a reference to Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind? That's the only thing I can think of. Also, how much do you think Uematsu hated the Chocobo theme by this point in the series? He's had to do, what, 8 or 9 remixes of it already, with more every game? I'm pretty sure that if he'd stayed on the series much longer than he did, we would have started getting things like Hate the Chocobo and Kill the Chocobo. So yeah, Mount Colt is by and large a straightforward dungeon, but with 3 interesting things going on. First is that dark figure we just saw. He'll be showing up now and then as proof that we're on the right track. That's important, since this dungeon has wrong branches and a possibility of getting lost like Figaro Cave, but it is a lot longer. So this serves to kind of ease us in. It also helps draw us forward by giving a touch of mystery to the place. Who is that? What do they want? Why are they trying to hide from us? It generates one of the key elements of suspense, which is giving the audience information, the presence of the shadowy figure, that is not available to the characters. This helps draw us forward in the same way that he indicates that we're going in the right direction. We want to see him because we want to solve the mystery, and so we go in the direction that we find him, which helps lead us through the dungeon. It's a fairly clever method of more or less tricking the audience into learning how to navigate this game. Second is the alternation between underground and outdoor tile sets. We saw a very little bit of that in Narsh, but here it's a major feature of the dungeon. This helps give it a distinct character from what we've seen before. This is our 3rd time mucking about in caves, but they've been different enough to be interesting. Third and final is that battles are getting more complex. Enemies do more damage, they take more than 1 round to kill, and with these brawlers we get a first. Enemies that are healed by one of our normally damaging attacks, namely poison. Picking the right moves for the specific battle is becoming increasingly important. Again, the slow expansion of choice and freedom is a major aspect of the early game and serves as a gameplay counterpoint to the story of the Empire's increasing expansion of control. Another thing worth commenting on here is the music. It's a little bit reminiscent of music that was used in similar dungeons in FF5 that had mountain climbing, inside-outside elements to them. But it's also actually very narrowly unique. There's going to be very few instances in the game that use this music. And that's an interesting choice. It marks this dungeon as being special. Remember, Narsh was kind of an introductory thing. Figaro Cave was very, very small. In many ways, this is the first true dungeon in the game. And it's where we'll face the first non-tutorial boss. So giving it some unique music helps emphasize that importance. There is a noticeable pattern to exploring the dungeon, however, which will hold for many, but not all, of the dungeons in the game. Given a choice between continuing straight and turning, always turn, because that will take you to the dead end with treasure, while continuing straight will continue the side path. Again, it's a way of encouraging and rewarding exploration common in JRPGs, but here in the early game it also serves as yet another example of chaotic heroes, constantly branching off to side paths against an excessively orderly empire. The encounter rate in this game really is frustratingly high. Random encounters are kind of an annoyance. I have some thoughts about why they were used, what they're for, what they accomplish, but I'm going to wait until we have a stretch of the game where there's nothing else to talk about, because it's going to take a little bit to unpack. In fact, I think I know exactly what stretch of the game I'm going to use it for. It's going to be a rather later video than this. And Terra is dead. Death is rare in the early game, but quite costly. Phoenix Downs are expensive in this game, and unlike some later games, you do not automatically revive at the end of battle. The only way to recover a dead, or fainted I guess, character prior to getting life spells is a Phoenix Down, in, or using a tent at a save point. And as you can see, I've only got 3 Phoenix Downs. I'd better be very careful about keeping my character's HP up, but that requires either my limited supply of tonics and potions, or using MP that are nearly as difficult to restore as reviving the dead, which again is an example of attention to detail. Most early game shops don't carry items that restore MP, because magic is an ancient power that no one in the modern world wields. Why would they carry them? Frankly, it's strange that any of them do, but there are some. I don't know, maybe tinctures taste really good. I don't know. Fortunately for our limited resources, most dungeons do have a save point a short distance before the boss. Some have more than one, but usually there is still some walking to do between the last save point and the boss. Certainly less than in FF4, but still a goodly amount by comparison to later Final Fantasy games, which generally try to minimize frustration by minimizing the number of random encounters you have to do over if the boss kills you. Here, bosses are rarely that challenging, and anyway, you retain EXP when you die and return to the last save point, so the presence of a bit of a gauntlet between boss and save point isn't as big a deal. After all, you're slowly building up levels as you die repeatedly, so if you have the patience for it, you can just keep flinging yourself at the gauntlet until you're high enough level and have enough HP and MP to make it through without dying. The operative words there, of course, are if you have the patience. I think I did as a kid, but increasingly as an adult, I do not. Which, combined with my lack of time, is probably why I basically just don't play JRPGs anymore. Don't get me wrong, in a lot of ways this is one of the less bad games in that respect. Still, the Mount Colt's Gauntlet is one of the more annoying ones, since you have to spiral in on the boss, meaning you can see your goal, and the enemies do hit quite hard, so you can get situations like the one I'm in now, where Terra died again, and I am heading into the boss fight with only 1 Phoenix down. I don't have all that many tonics either, so I'm going to have to spend some MP and hope I still have enough for the boss. In hindsight, I should probably have used that money I got by selling stuff back in South Figaro. Buy some onyx, maybe a couple of antidotes. I don't think I could have afforded Phoenix Downs. They are really expensive. But it would have been nice to have a bit more healing items. Have to rely less on Terra's extremely limited MP supply. Oh well. You live, you learn. That's an interesting point though, and one which I want to explore a bit later on. The degree to which this game starts out as having a heavy resource management element, but as it goes on that becomes less and less important as you start building up larger and larger stockpiles of the various relevant resources. Money, items, magic points. By the end of the game, you've really got almost no resource limitations at all, and I think that's a significant factor in creating the feeling of power that comes with developing your character up to high level, as much as or more than seeing big damage numbers and flashier spells. And now Locke is poisoned, too. Fortunately, I still have a couple of antidotes, so it's not a big loss. And here comes the boss. Interestingly, Vargas thinks Sabin sent us and attacks us. Perhaps he knows Sabin's family or recognizes a resemblance between him and Edgar. Perhaps he's just paranoid. As we will see, he's clearly someone who jumps to conclusions. This is actually a rather clever reveal. The shadowy figure looked like Sabin, but here it's revealed to actually be Vargas, whose sprite is just similar enough to be confused for Sabin in silhouette. The Brawlers, if not all the monsters we fought so far in this dungeon, are thus implied to be fellow students of Duncan working for Vargas to kill us, the people he pegged as working for Sabin. In short, there's a war here between Duncan's students, and we've blundered right into the middle of it by looking for Sabin. But again, this is working to characterize Sabin before he appears. In this case, as someone who would fight alone against all his fellow students if he thought it were right to do so. Also, Vargas has bears. Don't know why, maybe to establish the mountain's animals really are working for him, too? We can't even damage him until the bears are dead. Unfair. But, making clear that Vargas fights dirty? He's clearly the evil student in the classic martial arts dramatic cliché of the good student and the evil student who both studied under the same master. Oh good, that's one bear down. We're making progress. No, it looks like tools are definitely the more damaging way to go with Edgar. And now it's just us and Vargas. His healing wasn't completely necessary, I guess, but oh well. Once we get down to just Vargas, this fight isn't so bad. At least he's vulnerable to poison, unlike his brawler minions. Very vulnerable, actually. He can still do Gale Cut, but we can hammer him pretty hard, too. And even on a critical hit, he's doing less damage than Terra can heal, only slightly more than a tonic. We're basically pretty okay here. Ah, there we go. He's actually dead now. He just has a really long and elaborate death sprint. Starting with, at long last, Sabin arriving. I do love how the rest of us just move over to the side to watch while Sabin and Vargas argue. And this is what I mean by saying Vargas jumps to conclusions. He murdered his father because he thought he chose Sabin, when really he'd chosen Vargas. I do believe that's another Star Wars quote there. And again we have that theme. Fate, after all, is the orderly procession of events according to a plan. We're fighting against that. Defying fate. Or would be if I could get the bloody Street Fighter style inputs down. And yeah, Doomfist. There's now a time limit on this fight. Even though HP-wise Vargas is already dead, it is technically possible to get a game over here. Which would just be annoying, and is another reason the gap between the Mount Colt save point and the boss is one of the worst in the game. But he is already dead, so one successful blitz is all it takes to finish the fight. And if I remember correctly, I think the game actually tells you how to perform a blitz if you fail 2 or 3 times, which should still leave you plenty of time for 2 or 3 attempts to do it before the timer runs out. So it's not that unfair, it just helps add a sense of urgency to an otherwise pretty straightforward death script. This is actually an interesting choice. Once he's actually in the party, at least at first, Sabin is straightforwardly the bruiser that Terra sees him as. It's only those hints we got before that there's more to him, and which, later on in the game, we'll see more of that alternate side. It's interesting that Sabin knows about the Returner hideout. It's unlikely that it'd be common knowledge, since presumably they'd want to hide from the Empire. So, more likely, Duncan and his students are allies of the Returners. But then that makes Locke's ignorance equally interesting. The most likely explanation seems to me that Sabin knew Locke was the liaison between Narsh, Figaro, and the Returners, and so he actively avoided him in order to keep his location secret from his brother. This is an important thing for Sabin to do, because Sabin, as one of Duncan's people, is actively working against the Empire, while Edgar, at least on the surface, is trying to look like he's allied with them. So that's a good reason for the brothers to stay separate. Now that the cover's blown, there's no need to keep hiding, so Sabin can emerge and rescue Edgar. Again though, the game only has 3 or 4 lines of dialogue here, and it has to fit that complex political situation into that dialogue. I think it does admirably well, given those constraints. And of course, one last random encounter for old annoyance's sake. Seriously, it's pretty standard for the times, but honestly, there should not be random encounters after the boss. That's just frustrating for the player. And we're out! On to the only other location in this little valley, the Returners' hideout. Let's be ridiculous with save files, and then we can head on in. Oh, I'm still in control. Was not expecting that. And now I'm not in control again. So of course the minute I get back control of my character, I run away from the obvious door. RPG 101, my friends. I mean, sure, Bannon is waiting to meet me, but a quick nap won't hurt, right? I mean, I know that as soon as I talk to Bannon, plot is going to happen. That's obvious even if I haven't played the game before. So, rest, heal up lingering damage from the boss battle and the fight afterwards, then check out if there's anything interesting in the shop. Maybe then I'll talk to Bannon. Okay. Okay, and here's one of the places in the game that sells tinctures, aka MP restoratives. Why? What possible use could they have when Terra is the first spellcaster any of these people have ever seen? Do they make good marinades? It must be really good for 1500 GP. I don't know, it's just that for a game that has been doing such a good job of balancing story and gameplay, the store availability of tinctures is a weird exception. But alright, it serves a gameplay purpose, and sometimes that has to be more important than story immersion. And you know what? I can come up with a story reason for it. Maybe the reason they're so expensive and only found in some shops is that they have to be made from scratch on the fly. That the recipe for them is still remembered from back when there was magic by a couple of people, and they're mixing them as the party shows up and asks for them. Apologies for the sound glitching, by the way. My computer doesn't quite have the capacity to emulate FF6 and record it at the same time. It really, really should, though. I'll try to have it fixed for future parts. Whoops. Kinda got distracted there. Stood in one spot for a ridiculously long time. Sorry about that. I can just edit it out later. You know, that fade out, fade in I was talking about last episode. Ominously, there's a save point right before talking to Bannon, but actually, it's for a bit later. Still, thanks to them appearing before bosses, save points are a bit worrisome, aren't they? Anytime you see one, you know there's death lurking ahead. And again, you have to feel for Terra. She has very little clue what's going on. I think this might be the first time the word Esper has even been said in front of her, other than when she was wearing the slave crown. I don't know, the guy who took it off might have said something. Either way, she likely has little idea of what that is or what she's getting herself into. Just that there's been quite a lot of fighting since she had her crown removed. It's interesting that Terra claims it's a lie that she wiped out so many soldiers. Is it exaggerated from the number she really killed? Or simple denial on her part? I tend toward thinking the latter. She just doesn't want to believe she's capable of such a massacre. But she does remember it. It was in that flashback before the random Moogle interlude in Narsh. I had a teacher once who asked a question you rarely hear in regard to Pandora's box. Why was Hope in there to begin with? It's a box of all the evils in the world, and Hope is at the very bottom. Which means Hope has to have been the first thing the gods put in. Tasked with filling a box with every imaginable evil, the very first one the gods thought of was Hope. Because, or so my teacher claimed, and I think I agree, Hope is actually the worst evil of all. Hope is what makes you put up with all the other evils because you think they might eventually go away. Hope is what makes you go on with your life as it is when what you should do is start setting things on fire. Terra is not the Returner's hope. Terra is a nuke. Terra is the harbinger of destruction. And that's exactly what they need. A weird statement by Locke. As far as I know, this is the only time in the game it's mentioned. When we eventually get his defining trauma, it has nothing to do with someone he cares about being imprisoned. Somebody he eventually will care about is imprisoned, but he hasn't met her yet. It's possible that he means that Rachel is metaphorically imprisoned between life and death, but that's as much his doing and the doing of that guy in Kollingen as it is the Empire's doing. So I prefer to think that this is just an untold tale. Something happened to someone Locke cared about, one of a billion stories of people suffering at the hands of the Empire. Terra's reaction is interesting too, that she has no significant other. Probably thanks to Edgar being essentially the second friend she has ever had, she's fixated on this notion of romantic love as being a major lack in her life. Remember that up until this point, the Final Fantasy games, especially 4, have had a lot of standard medieval fantasy romantic love tropes floating around. So we expect Terra to be the damsel in distress who must find true love. And she is, sort of, and will, sort of, but very much not in the usual sense. For now, though, that's the best understanding of human connection she can come up with. I really like that Edgar acknowledges this. Fighting the bad guys is not, in itself, enough to make you one of the good guys. You have to be working for a good cause and using good methods, not just one or the other, and he acknowledges that they need to respect Terra as a person in exactly the way the Empire didn't. Of course, the game can't actually allow that. There's no branching plotline where you refuse to help the returners. Eventually, you have to agree to make the plot advance. So there's a tension here. The game wants to be about order versus chaos, with order as the initial villains, but its nature as a game compels a certain orderliness. And here it is, Terra's moment of choice, to throw in her lot with the desperate band who have been helping her for the last several days, return to the people who enslaved her, or wander off and try to make her own way. Bannon lays it on pretty thick, of course, but the correct answer, surprisingly, is actually no. See, if you say yes right away, you get a gauntlet, a relic that can be bought later. But if you say no a couple times, you get the much better Genji Glove, of which there are only a handful in the game. So even though the technology constrains you to eventually help, the game is actually rewarding you for resisting its own guide rails. And if you keep refusing, the game even rewards you with a unique scene, giving Terra a bit of characterization based on your choice as a player. Pretty advanced for the SNES. But it still railroads you along. Thanks to a wealthy trader, the Empire has captured South Figaro and is advancing on Returner headquarters. And now we get something unsurprising to players of FF4. Party hit maximum size, so of course now someone has to leave so that a new character can join. That's how it worked in FF2 and 4, after all. To a lesser extent 5. And this is another of those little hints that Sabin isn't the musclehead that Terra described him as. You can see that he's embarrassed by his brother. He sees his behavior as being inappropriate, which again ties into that whole favorite flower, favorite tea. He is someone who was raised as a prince, who has a sense of propriety and an appreciation for the finer things. He just also has been living at this austere martial artist kind of lifestyle. This very physical approach to life. And here is our new character, Bannon. Except, he didn't get a name sequence, and he can't be equipped with anything. Because he's just a guest character, not a full-fledged party member. Locke still had to leave to make room for him, though. Yes, there is a reason for both Terra and Sabin to have sprint shoes, trust me. I really like that the injured returner who brought news of the fall of Figaro is here in bed. Attention to detail. I'm not clear on how this handful of returners plans to keep the Empire from taking this place out, however. Maybe once it's clear that none of the leadership or terror are here, the Empire gave up on them. If I recall correctly, this place is still here and still has a handful of returners in it later in the game, so I'll try to remember to come back and double check that. And here we are at the Leet River, which for some reason in my brain is the Narsh River. I will try to not call it that, but odds are good that I might slip up at some point. But yeah, it's literally just make a choice of direction every few minutes and have a bunch of random encounters in between. Not very fun play. Thinking about it though, it is a loss of choice and freedom just as the Empire is attacking. It's an imposition of oppressive order. Thematically it makes sense, it's just as a gameplay element that it doesn't. Fortunately, Bannon has a ridiculously OP ability, Health. Or, as it is known in every other translation, Pray. Because that really is all he can do. Pray. Hope. It's enough to keep the party standing indefinitely, but they have to actually fight back to accomplish anything. Hoping alone does nothing, and Bannon can never be anything but a guest character, simultaneously overpowered and extremely limited. And yeah, that dialogue is the only interaction I have outside of combat in this entire segment of game. Okay, so now we're finally at the save point, which means we're finally almost done with this bloody segment. And of course, save point means boss. So, story-wise, there's a couple of options that make sense. Mostly something to do with the Imperial attack. Maybe a Magitech armor that caught up with us. Maybe an aquatic Magitech armor. That would be interesting. But no, they're going to go the other direct. They're going to take advantage of the fact that we're on water. Now comes one of the silliest, most out-of-nowhere characters in the game, Ultros. Ultros is an interesting enemy. First, he's pretty obviously an attempt to repeat the success of Final Fantasy V's Gilgamesh, a joke boss who proved extremely popular. He's just a little too forced to quite work, I think. He lacks Gilgamesh's personality. Plus, Gilgamesh had a clear story role as the villain's incompetent lieutenant, while Ultros pretty much comes out of nowhere? But he makes up for that a bit game mechanically. Namely, he has a relatively large number of scripted comments he makes while attacking or being attacked. For example, hitting him with fire causes him to say "Yout, seafood soup" and use his ink attack. Which would be extremely effective, mild damage and a really nasty status ailment that makes your physical attacks virtually guaranteed to miss, if not for a bug that causes the blind status to do nothing whatsoever. Whoops! Anyway, Delicious Morsel, Let Me Get My Bib is an announcement that he's hitting Terra with his best attack. It doesn't come in time for you to do anything about it, but that's not the point. This isn't about helping you in your combat strategy, it's about giving him personality. The fight itself is just a pretty standard DPS race. Muscleheads hate him, meanwhile, is what he says to attack Sabin. He's a bit stronger than, say, Vargas, but the fact that the blind status ailment does nothing due to an error in how attack accuracy is calculated means that he's a lot less of a menace than he was really intended to be. And so from the start, he's pure joke boss. Oh, there he goes retreating with almost a Porky Pig quote. And this sequence is just weird. is Ultros actually still around? Or is our party just imagining that things like Terra getting her leg grabbed? I don't know. It's a strange sequence, like most sequences in the game that use this music. I think they're trying a little too hard to be comical, and it's not something they can really pull off. Of course, this moment serves to demonstrate that Sabin isn't a prince who pretends to be a musclehead. He's a prince who is also a musclehead. This is pure musclehead happening here. And now Sabin's gone. Again, this was something FF4 in particular did a lot. Your party had a fixed maximum size of 5 and hit it relatively early in the game. But then characters would get pulled away or separated by game events, and you'd continue following your first character, Cecil, while they went off and did their things. Some people died, some rejoined, left, and in the meantime, Cecil would also be joined by new people. So for the Final Fantasy savvy player, that's clearly what's happening here. The game is making room for new characters to join, removing Sabin and Locke so that we can get 2 new people. Shadow might be one of them, Mog might be one of them, maybe we'll get entirely new people and those 2 will show up later. Or not. What the game does instead is something quite clever, very surprising for this period of RPGs. It opens up an entirely new dimension of choice. We can choose which character to follow. We're not bound to following Terra the way we were to following Cecil in FF4. It didn't just open 1 or 2 new slots for characters to join the party, it opened 7 slots in 3 parties. This was a huge twist when this game was new. It's still relatively uncommon for games to do this, because what's going on here is that you follow each branch, find out what happened to each of the characters, and then continue on once you've done all 3. Note, too, that we're Mog here. Before, his arrival marked the first appearance of real branching paths in the game, an open space in which to switch parties and plan our defense. Here again, he's the game's representative of choice between parties and branches. He empowers us to choose the order in which we'll explore these storylines. So, it's possible to power level your characters here on the river by trapping them in a loop, but it's utterly pointless. You see, your characters gain relatively little from leveling up. HP and MP, Terra and a couple of characters we'll meet later get a handful of spells, and your level is a factor of the damage equations, but your core stats don't change. The only way to actually increase your stats requires access to Espers, which we don't have. It's another great bit of integration between gameplay and story. People allied with Espers can reach heights of power impossible for those without Espers, no matter how much they love them. Of course, the downside is that late-game magic more or less breaks the game, but we'll worry about that when we get there. The music that means I'm free of the river. Such a sweet sound. I'd just like to note that the river makes no sense from a geophysical perspective, and young me was confused for years about how rivers work as a result. We appear to have just ridden a raft with no sail, keel, oars, or anything upriver for a massive distance. It makes no sense. Of course, the problem with being leader of a secret resistance is that your face isn't as well known as the terrifying Magitech witch Question Mark, aka Terra. The Narsh guards aren't going to let us in. Fortunately, we can get to a friendly house the back way by reversing the way we came out. First things first, though, some free healing. Never pass up a chance for free healing. And this is actually a nice little moment. It shows that Tara has been paying attention. She's been confused, but she's been paying attention. She remembers things, she notices details, she's learning very rapidly. In short, what we're seeing is that Tara, in addition to being a magical powerhouse, is really quite intelligent. And I like that. Yeah, the enemies here have very little chance against us. It's honestly kind of ridiculous, but I guess it does serve a purpose of showing how we've grown. In just the short time since Tara has left, she's gone from being seriously threatened by this kind of enemy to having friends and allies that can wipe them out in one round. And Tara is now just as competent as they are. So while it is mildly annoying to be backtracking through this dungeon, especially after the annoyance that was the Lead River, this is still a reminder that we've become stronger, that what was once a threat is now a nuisance. And I suppose that is a nice thing to have. And there are some elements to keep it from becoming completely repetitive. This puzzle, for example, was not here before. In fact, this room was not one we passed through before. We skipped it thanks to Locke. This puzzle would be much easier if it weren't for that conversation and the accompanying camera pan. Fortunately, I managed to remember it anyway, which you'd find more impressive if you knew how appallingly terrible my memory for this sort of thing is. Oh, and hey, remember this place? It apparently leads to Moogletopia. Mog's refusing to talk to us, though. There's nothing to do here, it's just confirmation that the Moogles really do just hang around in Narsh waiting for main characters to show up. And we're here! Made it to Old Dude, who is apparently named Arvis's house. Narsh is neutral, despite having been violently attacked by the Empire. Shows just how cowed people are. Their choice is not fight or not. Their choice is get conquered or try to stay out of it. And again, the Esper is treated like a lost nuke, a terrifying power to which Tara is the key. I'm a little disturbed by the notion of Tara restoring order. I really hope what they mean is that explaining who she is and what she's about will change things, not that they're going to use her to nuke everyone who isn't on their side. That's it for Tara and Edgar's track. And I think that's a good stopping point for this episode. Next time, Locke and at least part of Sabin's plotline.